Good morning. The Transit and Bus Committee meeting of March is called to order. Mr. Marino, are there any members of the public who have signed and wish to speak?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Are the mics working?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We have 14 public speakers this morning. I would like to remind all the public speakers, you each have 2 minutes to speak.
I think the mic's not on.
Hello? 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 Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We have 14 public speakers this morning, and I would like to remind all the speakers, I will call your name. Please come forward to the podium, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. The first speaker is Omar Vera. Mr. Vera will be followed by Erica Overton.
Good morning, MTA Board's Transit Committee. Welcome back to another edition of your meeting. I would like to recommend, I reiterate what I said, last month with the entry-exit only turnstiles that's needed because other cities have that. And also, it doesn't, block the flow of people trying to enter or exit while there's so many people trying to, going the other way to the same turnstile. Therefore, if you have separate entry-only, exit-only turnstiles, the flow will go easier because then people will know where to go. Yes. And second, I believe it's time that the MTA, when they get the funding, that they ought to do what they did last century, like the predecessors did last century, like the city and all these private companies that the city took over, the transit companies, the IRC, BMT, your alphabet soup. And simply because we need an extension, an overhaul and extension of our subway system. Queens Village isn't served. Kings Plaza, where I now work at the Macy's there, is not served by subways, just by buses. We need more extensions here. We have President Byford, who actually oversaw the extension of one of the Toronto subway lines. That was great. But yes, we need to have more capital construction focus on more subway extensions within the city. And of course, last but not least, that also includes the Summit Line in extension to New Jersey. With that said, I'll let you all do. And last but not least, consider the Rockaway extension on the A and the C train. All right, bye.
Thank you, Mr. Vera. The next speaker is Erica Overton, and Ms. Overton will be followed by Murray Bowden.
Hi, I'm Erica Overton from Assemblymember Linda B. Rosenthal's office. She's unfortunately in Albany today and could not be here, but she would like to give public comment on the M104. So I'm Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal. I represent the 67th Assembly District, which includes the Upper West Side and parts of Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. I would like to thank the New York City Transit and the Metropolitan Transportation Authority for the opportunity to speak during public comment regarding the decision to reduce bus service along one of the most popular bus routes and often subject to service cuts on the west side, the M104. It is one of the main public transportation options for those who travel between West 41st Street and West 129th Street along Broadway. With every service cut by transit, the route becomes less reliable and less accessible. The MTA must immediately cease all bus service cuts to the M104 and any other line it is considering until after the release of the Bus Action Plan and conversations with community members, leaders, and other transportation stakeholders have taken place. Year after year, the MTA routinely points to decreased ridership as justification for additional cuts to the M104. However, discussions with my constituents, consultation with transportation experts, and my own experience with the M104 makes clear that the repeated service cuts coupled with wholly unreliable service have caused riderships to decrease. This is not mere speculation on my part. I circulated a petition which garnered over 700 signatures about the proposed cuts to the M104 and asked my constituents to share their reasons for abandoning the bus. One constituent said, "I had to wait 20 minutes or longer for the M104 bus. I'm a senior citizen and this presents real difficulty for me." One senior stated, "Buses are particularly important for senior citizens with mobility issues. Reducing the already poor levels of service is a further slap in the face to taxpayers on the Upper West Side." Another senior said, "I've lost years off my life just standing and waiting for the M104 bus in hot, sweltering weather, in the rain and wind, and during the winter's icy blasts. There are so few and far from in between." So hopefully, we won't cut the M104 this April. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Overton. The next speaker is Murray Bowden. Mr. Bowden will be followed by Eugene Falick.
We live
excuse me, we live in a world of rapid change. It's not the world of our children, our grandchildren. It's going to be the world of our grandchildren. We need to think, you need to think outside the box. Andy has reevaluated the speed limits that have been in place for many, many years and finds he can raise them and raise the speed of service. You've paid attention to consultants who, in fact, may not be correct, and I'd like to illustrate that by the accident that happened in Florida. They depended on consultants on a new bridge, very much like the Tappan Zee Bridge. They built a new span in one piece on the ground because that was safer and easier. It's as if they built the center of the Tappan Zee Bridge, brought it in there without building the towers first. It's a recipe for disaster, and yet everybody approved of it, and they had the best engineers saying, this is the way to do it. Can you imagine putting that whole span in the Tappan Zee Bridge without the tower, without the stay cables to hold it up? That's what they did. You need to reevaluate the way you've been doing things for years and years and years, as Andy has done and is beginning to ask questions about procedures that have been in place for years and years. Some of those procedures are no longer valid. This is the world of our grandchildren. We need to prepare for that. It's certainly not the world I grew up in, nor the world that most of you grew up in. Be prepared for change. Be prepared to ask questions. The way we did it last week or last year doesn't work anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. The next speaker is Eugene Fallick. Mr. Fallick will be followed by Liz Patrick.
Hello. I have 3 points I'd like to discuss in terms of the subway system. As it's almost the end of the quarter, I'd be interested to learn the preliminary conclusions, at least, of the Queens Rail study. Second, I would suggest that you run 11 or 9-car trains, depending on the system, to provide an immediate 10% increase in capacity. Finally, I'd propose a new signalization model, a method of quickly and low-cost eliminating the worst points of failure in the current system and allow for the gradual transition to a computerized system. The current system uses electromechanical relays which require a lot of maintenance and are points of failure, and uses copper cables with cloth-covered wiring to connect them. I would suggest near the entrance to every tower, you cut the cables, install a fiber optic multiplexer, which would allow the separation of the two systems, and then from the tower end of the multiplexer, you could install a second connection to a computerized control system, and then gradually eliminate the mechanical towers. Then you could move the multiplexers out closer to the track and eliminate the fiber optic cables, which are the other significant point of failure in the current system. Once you've done that, you can easily add additional sensors and convert the complete computer-based train control system. This would be something that you could implement in a fairly short period of time, at fairly low cost, and probably pay for it just with the maintenance that you would save. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fallick. The next speaker is Liz Patrick. Ms. Patrick will be followed by Ellen Shannon.
Hello, I'm Liz Patrick with the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association. President Byford, we're all looking forward to the release of the bus action plan at next month's MTA Board meeting. But we're asking that after the rollout, can the MTA bus management reach out to community boards to explain how the bus action plan will improve the reliability of local bus service in each district? We believe that engaging the community boards in dialogue will offer two benefits to MTA bus management. The first is it will help manage expectations regarding the timeline to implement some of the strategic recommendations, especially for local bus routes. This would include transit signal priority, the tap-and-go payment system, and all-door boarding, which may take some time and money to implement. The second is to provide an opportunity to partner with residents to assist with enforcement efforts. We recently had a small victory in our neighborhood that demonstrated the benefits of collaboration on bus lane enforcement. The 70th Street Post Office was parking its vehicles in the 2nd Avenue bus lane. One of our residents living across the street kept a daily log with photos of the violations, which MTA bus managers shared with the post office manager on at least 3 occasions, yet the problem persisted. The NYPD 19th Precinct was prohibited from ticketing or towing the postal trucks, so we reached out to Representative Carolyn Maloney's office. Her letter to the Postmaster of Manhattan, Daniel O'Neill, finally got the matter resolved. This small example demonstrates the benefit of teamwork among neighborhood groups, the MTA bus, DOT, and the NYPD. Residents care about their local bus service, and we're eager to help in any way possible. Please put us to work on your behalf. We can accomplish more together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. The next speaker is Ellen Shannon, and Ms. Shannon will be followed by Marcel Dejean.
Good morning, President Byford. I'm Ellen Shannon of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA. There's no small amount of press covering the issues on bus and subway concerns right now. However, you've remained a steady, clear, and thoughtful voice in every article. The voice of integrity, transparency, and willingness to address areas of critical importance that have long gone unaddressed. While emotions are high, we also understand the high integrity and knowledge of those running the system, and how hard those in the Department of Subways and Operations Planning are working on behalf of all the riders. While the press is also working hard to improve the system, this acknowledgement is missing from their coverage. The most recent issue is that of the subway timers in the system that are causing track speeds to be slower than necessary in some areas. When the signal timer plan was first devised, it did not unduly affect operations, given the system was not at capacity and ridership was significantly lower. But now the slow track speeds are compromising the system's resiliency after an incident. We appreciate that within a few weeks of your arrival, you took the issue seriously and put a task force together to review this potential root cause. We appreciate your focus and drive to solve our problems. We also recognize that the ultimate answer is CBTC or some other method that accomplishes the same thing as CBTC does. Today, our greatest hope is that the leaders in Albany, New York City, and this MTA board provides you with the solid support needed to improve the track speed deficiencies, thus improving the resiliency of the system after a major incident and decreasing travel times for all riders. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shannon. The next speaker is Marcel Dejean, and he will be followed by Jean Ryan.
So last year, Transit introduced 2 new performance metrics. They're additional train time and additional platform time. And those metrics are a great improvement over the old ones, but they have some flaws. So the additional train time and additional platform time seem to hover around like a minute and 30 seconds. If everybody was waiting an extra minute and 30 seconds for their train compared to what's scheduled, everybody would be fine with that. But what it doesn't capture is the range of times that people end up having to wait and the delays. It doesn't really capture delays. I mean, they get factored into the average, but it doesn't really count. So, I mean, what it really ends up counting is most of the trains run on time. More than 50% of the trains are on time. But what you should be looking at instead of instead of the average time that people wait, is what the 90th percentile of people are waiting, because you want to know what the delays are, how often are people waiting more than 20 minutes for a train. So definitely, instead of average platform time, average train time, look at 90th percentile train time, 90th percentile platform time.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jean Ryan, and Ms. Ryan will be followed by Parvati Devi.
Hi, I'm Jean Ryan. I live in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and I'm Vice President of Public Affairs for Disabled in Action. I'm going to give testimony today on the express bus problems for wheelchair users, which have really not been addressed, and I never see them mentioned in any bus report or anything. I've been riding since 2004, and I've been having problems since 2004, and I've been working on these problems with the MTA and New York City Transit on and off since 2004. Some changes have been made, but not substantially. There are 4 problems: untrained drivers who don't know how to use a lift, poorly designed lifts, poorly maintained equipment, and indifference of the MTA and New York City Transit to wheelchair users on the express buses. For the last 7 months, I tallied all my trips, 19 trips. 3 I couldn't get on, that's 16%. 11, no problems, 58%. 5, I got on, but I had to teach the driver how to use the lift or move the seats, or I had or there were problems with the lift and the seats. That's 26%. If you add those 2 bad ones together, you get 42% bad experiences taking the express bus. No wonder you don't see many wheelchair users on the express buses. We can't get on. So it's a citywide problem. I take the X27, X37, X28, and X38. But I know 4 people who have had problems with all the College Point express buses, especially the QM1, QM4, I gotta read this, QM5, QM6, QM7, QM8. Also the QM15, QM16, QM17, and the BXM1, BXM2, BXM6, and I'm sure the Staten Island buses have problems too. Solutions: train drivers hands-on at least every pick, and if there's a complaint, train them also, and include training for extras and vacation fill-ins. Make a better video also. Second, maintain lifts and moving seats, and third, design a better bus. Any questions? Yep.
Thank you, Miss. Thank you, Miss Ryan.
Here's my file.
The next speaker is Parvati Devi, who will be followed by Christine Bertet.
Hi, this meeting was scheduled quite early, and I had to walk half a mile from the subway, and I had to climb stairs to get here out of the subway. That disturbs me. I think these meetings should be held later in the day so that we can get a vehicle to drive us down here when it's not so crowded. Anyway, with the crowded and frequent buses like the M11 and the 7, the West Side does not have one accordion bus. That would really be helpful to at least get on it, especially when we have to wait for those buses so long. There are no seats along the bus stops along Central Park West. They can't put bus sheds, it's too narrow, but why not have a couple of seats? In June, my 86th Street subway at Central Park is scheduled for renovation. Will that include an elevator? If not, I hope a lawsuit will be in place. Maps of the train system show which stations have elevators, but many do not have elevators going to the street level. That is misleading signage. Where there is only one escalator, it always goes up. When will the MTA and our stores get it? People with disabilities have more trouble going down the stairs than up the stairs. On the buses, the line of single seats should have a sign reading that those seats should be given to people with walkers. Why don't all bus drivers make sure people with canes get a seat? Very rarely is this done. We are forced to get up for wheelchair users when they board, but the driver almost never makes us get up for us. I suggest drivers be made to wear recording devices. And baby carriages should always be folded unless the person's disability makes it unfeasible. And last, taxis should not be something you climb into. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Christine Berthet. Ms. Berthet will be followed by Roberta Seamer.
Good morning. So I just heard that customer satisfaction is something that to work on. I agree. But so why are the board meetings during working hours? I mean, your whole population works. They should be after hours so people can come and show up. I don't think it's right to do it this way. And then why cut service? That's not going to endear to you a lot of customers. There are less users because the buses are slow and unreliable. The solution is to protect bus lanes from traffic. We have protected bike lanes, we should have protected bus lanes. And this is very easy. It can be done at low cost by a low-profile lane separator. It only requires political will, not very sophisticated technology. It exists everywhere in the world, including countries which are not very advanced. So please install these devices on the M104 choke points or on the M11, and until such measures are tested and all the metro stations are ADA compliant, the bus is the only way for ADA persons to travel, and therefore there should be no cuts in bus service until those things are done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berthet. The next speaker is Roberta Seamer, and Ms. Seamer will be followed by Emily Miller.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being here. On behalf of Community Board 7, we have concerns about cuts to the M104. It is a major artery, Broadway, from 110 to 59th Street in our community board. And for many of our seniors, our disabled people, it's a route that they can safely take. We're also concerned about increasing service on the M10 during the construction of the subway stations, which will improve service tremendously. But during the time that they're being built, we would really appreciate increased service on the M10. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Emily Miller, and Ms. Miller will be followed by David Paul Gerber.
Good morning, Transit Board of MTA. My name is Emily Miller. I am representing 83rd Broad Association. I am a U.S. citizen and have been living in Upper West Side community for 30 years. And I used to be wealthy enough to take car service as well as healthy enough to ride bicycles. But last couple of years, I unfortunately become a victim of physical assaults, which restrained my left arm to be able to ride bicycles. At the same time, I have been a victim of financial crime, so I am not able to take car services, or I'm affluent enough to take cab all the time. That's how brought me to take MTA subway and bus all the time. But I do want to thank you, MTA subway system, that they always have those very informative posters, and I love those poetry in motion that enriches my morning with big smiles all the time. So thank you very much. However, on behalf of Upper West Side residents, I would like to point out we have an aging population with tremendous increase in their mobility and disability, various other medical conditions. And we also have young generation that are growing up to taking bus all the time with or without their caretaker to get familiar with our cosmopolitan city after school and going to school. Number three, we also have tremendous of healthy, young, middle-aged population who may be, just including me, have some temporary difficulties that in need of bus and subway. That's why we would like to MTA Board. I'm sorry, my time is up. Just to have 1 second. My punchline is, I would like to say no to M104 bus service cuts. That's going to be effective in this April, right? Thank you very much if you would take that into consideration.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is David Paul Gerber.
Good morning, everyone. Two things. On the last winter storm 2 weeks ago, only half of the planned winter service changes actually were posted on the MTA website. Part of the subway action plan is communication. They are making strides, but they need to improve communication. Finally, I just want to talk about the bus action plan. Buses have a right to be on the bus lane. They should not be obstructed by illegally parked cars, delivery trucks, or most dramatically, a vehicle with a police department placard or any type of placard. They have no business being on a bus lane. They have no business being on a bike lane. Vehicles illegally parked force bicyclists to share the road, putting bus operators as well as other vehicle drivers in danger. New York City Transit, as part of the bus action plan, should look into locations such as 2nd, 1st Avenue, SBS, Livingston Avenue, and Brooklyn. They should also look at the Park Row into Lafayette, which has rows and rows of illegally parked cars there, creating a blind spot where bus operators and other vehicles cannot see as they merge into by City Hall. Also, St. Nicholas Avenue by 145th Street is also another hot spot. These areas there where vehicles illegally park on bus stops obstruct bus movement, delay bus service. Placard abuse is also inherited in New York City Transit, where vests are being used all over the place. New York City Transit should make these steps to not to really eradicate, but to reduce the likelihood of these vehicles using placards and New York City Transit vests to illegally park anywhere, creating dangers to the bus operators themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gerber. Mr. Chairman, that was the last public speaker.
Thank you. The minutes from our February meeting are in the committee book. May I have a motion to approve? Second. Are there any changes or other comment on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approval? Opposed? Abstaining? The minutes are approved. Are there any changes to the work plan? Thank you. Then I'm happy to ask President Byford to make his report and introduce the new members of his team.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been another very busy 4 weeks here at New York City Transit, but I do believe that we've taken a big step forward, certainly in the work that I want to do to modernize this place top to bottom. To do that, I need to have the right structure. I need to have the right people within that structure and the right people with the right mandate. So I think we've got exactly that with my first senior appointment. And I'll just introduce Sarah now. Sarah Meyer joins the Transit Authority as our inaugural inaugural Chief Customer Officer. Sarah is heading up a new group. We're revising the business groups, and her group is deliberately called the Strategy and Customer Experience Group because that's what it does. It is all about identifying what customers need and then putting together strategies to then deliver against that mandate and then review how we actually did against what we set out to do. So Sarah joins us with a great pedigree from private consultancy. She's already familiar with the transit, not only as a native New Yorker, but also she spent some time in transit control in the RCC, the Rail Control Centre, and already has been in the thick of it with various challenges such as the recent nor'easters and various other problems. So I'd just like to welcome you, Sarah, to New York City Transit. It's great to have you on board. Mr. President, I might just make a few comments. I mean, my commentary will stand as it is. I think what's encouraging for me is listening to the speakers just now. So many of the themes that came through from the speakers, there's a symbiotic relationship here, I guess. It's good that these are the kinds of things we're working on. So we heard about bus action plan. Absolutely, it's our intention to table that plan next meeting. We've got some work to do to take it around to key stakeholders first of all. It's a very high-level plan, but it does set out what we believe needs to be done. We heard from speakers about accessibility. You'll recall that I made that one of my key points, one of my equal priorities when I first got here. And we've already now started on the review of all of the remaining stations. We've got a company on board, Stantec, who are starting to do the surveys of all of the remaining stations. So we will soon have a costed plan. In terms of subway, we've been super busy under Frank's leadership delivering the subway action plan, which was always for me the first point of call, Mr. Chairman, to stabilise the existing service such that New Yorkers can expect a reliable, punctual service to be the norm before we move on to the real challenge of the day, which is to re-signal the railway, comprehensively re-signal. Which takes me on to the Genius Challenge. Only a few weeks ago in this room, I think it was, we heard from the winners of the Genius Challenge just over 10 days ago, and I'm very excited about that. We're going to actively progress those winning entries and still look at some of the others as well, but actively progress those winning entries to the point of deciding are they viable or aren't they viable. They certainly are all of extreme interest to us, and we think that they've got real merit. That really that takes me on to current performance. Look, we weren't happy with January's performance. It was badly hit by the snowstorm. I do want to do a big shout out for the staff. Frank and Dow, your guys were fantastic. The New York City Transit employees out there in keeping the system going. So January's performance figures weren't as good as we want them to be. February has seen a return more to the norm, and that is good. March is already proving to be difficult with the various nor'easters we've had. But the good news is spring's round the corner. Every day we're out there with Subway Action Plan, pushing on with getting what I call the basics right. So cleaning drains, sorting out continuous welded rail, doing various other interventions that we know will make our system better. Couple of other points I have mentioned in my commentary. I made reference, and one of the speakers made reference to this. I have asked my team to look at what has been the impact now, the rolled up impact on subway punctuality, on subway performance of the various signal changes that were made post the 1995 Williamsburg Bridge crash. Now I stress, before anyone says, oh, hang on a minute, he's putting production before safety. No, I'm not. I'm a former safety director. I would never do that. I hold the go to jail card, so again, I would never do that. But I think it is good practice periodically to review the impact of changes, and I think we can do that safely. That the team have already identified or reviewed around 37 sites. So I want to have a look at that now in detailed analysis. What could we do to now, with the benefit of hindsight, maintain the safety benefit, but is there a way of mitigating the impact upon subway performance, capacity, and punctuality and reliability? Because again, as a former safety director, it's good practice to always look at, are there unintended consequences of one change? Have you inadvertently created a secondary safety risk, namely crowding because the system can't cope? So I do believe in looking at things holistically. We are going to do that. No changes will be made until they've been properly thought through, risk assessed, and consulted with our trade unions, because clearly we need to make sure that we follow due process. But I'm very confident that we're doing the right things as we head into the spring. I'm very confident that with the various plans that we're about to launch, the corporate plan, which is being written at the moment, which will map out what we'll do over the next 5 years to modernise this place top to bottom, and our ongoing focus on basics, including now the customer lens that Sarah applies. Mr. President, I'm very confident that we're on the right track, and I'll be happy to take questions.
President Byford, Mr. Merdler, and then Mr. Weisbrot.
Mr. Byford, while you are taking a good hard look at the safety component, may I respectfully suggest you might also take a look at an article published in the Village Voice, which seems to indicate that the signals and the alteration of the signals has caused significant delays in the operation of the subways. Whether that's valid or not, I leave to you, but I do ask you to look at it.
Commissioner, absolutely. I read that article. It wasn't a surprise to me because my scrutiny of this subject started some 3, maybe even 4, maybe even 5 weeks before that came out. And it was my interest was piqued by seeing a graph that clearly showed that where subway delays had been at a fairly standard static level for years, really. My interest was piqued by seeing a graph that showed a relentless ramp-up rise from around 2012. So I just asked a simple question: what happened then? What did we do differently? So that Village Voice report confirmed some of my suspicions, but again I would stress that we're going to do this calmly, we're going to use data, and we will be absolutely mindful of the safety benefit for which those improvements were intended, to make sure that if we do make any changes that we maintain the safety benefit but we add back the performance benefit that is needed.
Thank you.
Mr. Weisbrot.
Thank you. Mr. Byford, I have first of all, I really do appreciate the every month improvement in the reporting and the sort of focus on key issues, and each month it's getting better, and I thank you a lot for that. I really have 2 questions. One, and one particular improvement with respect to including a bus wait time experience, because I think, as we heard from so many of the speakers, that really is a big issue. I had 2 questions. One, I know January was a very tough month, and I did see the dramatic reduction in revenue miles in both subway and buses for January. But at the same time, revenue miles, if I read this correctly, revenue miles actually went up for Metro North and the LIRR, even though they suffered in many respects, clearly from the same weather conditions. And I'm wondering if you know, or your colleagues at Metro North and Long Island Railroad know, what accounts for that surprising difference.
I haven't looked at their stats in detail, and we've got quite enough to review from our own perspective, but certainly I'll be happy to talk to my colleagues and just see what their experience was. I mean, it's certainly not unusual that in protracted storm events, and we had a number of storms in January, and we've since had more in March, that for the reasons that Frank Giuseppe describes in his report, and for that matter Darrell in the bus report, there will be an impact upon operations, there will be an impact upon customer service as we battle through streets where people typically slow down because the roads are, and for that matter the subway is impacted by snow and ice in certain cases. But we're nearly through it. certainly we should be looking to get better at each such event, and I was very pleased actually with the way generally my team performed, and I was very pleased, one thing I forgot to mention in my commentary, in the way that the team performed on the weekend with the St. Patrick's Day Parade. Went very well.
Thank you. And again, I can understand buses because there's no comparison in that regard to Metro North and LIR, but the revenue mile loss in subways compared to the small increase in Metro North and LIR is baffling. So I would be interested if you can figure out why that may be the case. And then my second question is with respect to a recommendation that one of the speakers here made, which seemed pretty reasonable, which is instead, or maybe in addition, but perhaps instead of looking at average wait time, looking at the percentage of trains that are more than 5 minutes late, 10 minutes late, 20 minutes late, or whatever, because I think that's what people who ride the subway think about, as opposed to whether average wait times go up 2 seconds or 12 seconds or down 14 seconds.
Okay, well, we can certainly consider that. For me, Metro North or Long Island Railroad on time is an extremely important metric, as it is, to be fair, on some of our branch lines where you do need to know what time the train's coming, because the train will leave and should leave at a certain time. In the central core, and this is not unique to New York City Transit, it's the same on the Tube, it's the same elsewhere. To me, the most important thing is headway, because most people wouldn't know whether their particular train was the one that presented at the platform at a particular time, unless they're some kind of train spotter, wouldn't know whether that was the one that should have turned up. But headway, i.e. the gap between trains, which obviously influences the amount of time you're waiting, that is super important. But I take your point. I think particularly at the extremities, somewhere like Dyer Avenue or somewhere where you maybe head for a specific train, we should be mindful of both.
Mr. Reckler, and then, yes.
Thank you. Andy, when you do the bus action plan, when you spend that time looking at that, I'd encourage you also to think about enforcement and working. Obviously, I know Polly's been doing that in the Fix New York City plan, had some concepts. I mean, some of the commentary that we've heard from the speakers in terms of people parking with placards or driving in the bus lanes or blocking the box. What are the tools that we can recommend, whether or not we can do it ourselves or recommend working with our partners in the city or the state to be able to implement to ensure that our buses could flow more fluidly than they are today? Because as much as we want to get them flowing, if they can't get through the traffic, it doesn't do us any good. So I'd encourage that being part of it.
Well, I absolutely, Commissioner, that does form part of the work plan and the action plan that we will be presenting to you. It will also the plan itself will launch. I've asked Darrell and his team to progressively, it'll take time, work their way through all 300-odd bus routes in the same way that we've reviewed the express bus network on Staten Island. I really want us to look at every single bus route, to look at what are the root causes, ROOT, root causes on every route, and therefore what are the interventions that are required. They'll differ between routes, but it will take time, but it's worth the work. We're going to plough through it, but in the meantime, where there's some generic things like selfish people blocking bus lanes, we intend to take action on that with our partners.
Mr. Glucksman, then Mr. Birdler.
I actually have a couple of comments. The first one is that I've been greeted in my morning trips by your ambassadors with a nice smile each year, and it's a great program, and other customers around are also happy to hear that. Independently of our public speakers, I plan to address the bus lane thing. I ride the subways frequently, less frequently the buses, and I've always wondered what could I do. But now that I'm sitting here, Chief Coogan, I'm tasking you, and especially in light of the article in the Village Voice that said in 2012 it was 7,756 violations given for violation of the bus lane, and last year 2020. How did that happen? I mean, we've been getting beaten up about the bus service, and it's like a simple thing that could be done. Strict enforcement of the bus lanes. And I ask you to take this back to your counterparts in New York City Police Department and ask them to vigorously enforce these lanes. There's no reason that we should be delayed, our buses should be delayed. And I speak to the drivers, they're very discouraged about the fact that their bus lanes are being violated by, and we need to improve things here. And maybe you can give us a report next month what the city people have said about it.
Before Mr. Merdler, Commissioner Trottenberg, I think, wants to...
Yeah, just Randy, just to go to your point, the NYPD certainly has a role, but I think just to answer you and Scott, the thing we really need to enforce in our bus lanes is cameras. Because NYPD is not going to be there all the time in every place, 24 hours a day. Cameras can be. Right now, the city has the authority to use bus lane cameras in 16 of our bus routes. So you heard from Andy say he's got hundreds of bus routes. So NYPD has a role, but just to be clear, and I know Andy and I have talked about this, London and other cities that have really amazing bus systems, they rely on camera enforcement. They don't just rely on their local police forces. So, this is a message we'd like to bring up to Albany because the city can't deploy those cameras without state enforcement. So just to put that also on the table, that's an essential piece of the puzzle.
All right, so the last item was something that President Byford mentioned. I was traveling in another city last summer and riding in the bus, and the driver told me, he said, it would be a great thing if the managers would ride with us to see what we encounter. So I'm glad that you're planning to do this. Thank you.
Watch this space on that, and I'm putting my team on notice, the wider New York City Transit team. Our corporate plan will include a raft of activity around people, and one thing I feel particularly strongly about is you cannot effectively manage your team sitting in an office. So there's going to be a lot of going out and about, folks. We're going to be riding the system. We may even be shadowing people for the day to see what they do and see what help we can give them as senior leadership. All of this is being flushed out in the corporate plan, which you will get to see shortly.
Mr. Merdler.
Mr. Byford, I take your point that headway is far more important than the on-time performance within the platform area. But there has to be a metric of some sort. And one of the metrics that has been time-proven, but people don't particularly care for it on your side of the aisle, is how long it takes to live up to the schedule, how long it takes to get from point A to the terminal. And if you look at that statistic on page 50 of the book, it's awful. Not even half of the time are they on time on the number 2, 4, 5, 6, A, B, C, D, E, and F. That's a base that you have to work from and a factor that you have to consider. It just doesn't seem to fit. So may I suggest that you take a look at that. The other metric of trying to figure out whether you're waiting on the platform too long for 1 minute and 38 seconds or whatever is based on the time you get to punch in your card, your Metro card, race down the stairs or down the elevator or whatever, and you get down on the platform and a train comes in, and that's the end point. Well, it may not be your train. So the metric is flawed from beginning to end. I would suggest, if you can, that you take a look at it, because it really isn't a proper metric in terms of trying to determine whether there is the kind of performance you would want. Finally, with respect to the buses, permit me a comment, if I may. And that is, the police department does have authority to tag the fellow who's parked in the bus stop. Now, when Jamie Vitiello made those inquiries of the predecessor commissioner, I believe, a few months back, he was told, we're not doing that. I would ask you to go back and check and let us know whether or not you're going to enforce it, and if so, when and how. Thank you.
I think we're ready to move on to the subway report and the customer service section. Mr. Jazicki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subway's full written report can be found in your board materials on page 21. Just a few highlights. You'll notice that we've been able to reduce the lag time in reporting for most subway performance measures, such that we're now reporting February data for many of its statistics. Efforts are underway to reduce the lag time for mean distance between failure, on-time performance, and terminal delays. You'll note that the subway performance in February showed significant improvement from January of 2018. There were a total of 56 weekday major incidents in February versus 105 in January. Overall, the major incident trend has shown improvement since implementation of the subway action plan. Additional train time has also seen an improvement on the A division. We attribute that to recent schedule adjustments, and the mean distance between failure for January was a bit lower than recent months at 106,900 miles, but we're projecting the February to be about 127,900 miles, certainly a good rebound. We've experienced an improvement in our elevator performance, 96.3 availability in February. The Staten Island Railway continues to improve with the MDBF. And lastly, in line with our commitment to provide better communications to our customers during incidents, we're pleased to announce the launch of our new and growing program. That's the Incident Customer Assistance Program, also known as ICAP. In this program, we dispatch managers and non-represented employees to supplement our customer service efforts during major incidents and service diversions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Jazicki, I presume?
Yes. Frank, how is the experience with the R179s going? MDBF, reliability, customer feedback?
Gotcha. So, interestingly enough, on Friday afternoon, we had to remove the 3 trains that were in service. We removed them from service. We had an issue with one of the components that activates the emergency brake handles. It was picked up during our commissioning and inspection of the 4th train unit that was getting ready for service. Subsequent inspections, we decided to remove the 3 in service until the issue is fully resolved. So we're working with Bombardier, their subcontractors, and our engineering team to resolve as quickly as possible.
If there's no one else on this part of it, I'll ask Mr. Irick to present bus and paratransit reports.
Sure thing. Good morning. So as Andy mentioned earlier, January was in fact a very challenging month weather-wise for us, and it's had some impacts on fleet reliability. In fact, this was the first time in a long time that we've experienced a real blip in performance, in that we saw a 15% decline in MDBF. The team jumped in immediately to begin to arrest, mitigate, and course correct, and I'm happy to announce that there's been a major rebound for February, and that continues on into March, so we're doing good there. This is an area that we've done very well in over the last several years, mainly by the actions of this board in terms of supporting the bus operations and the capital plan. We've delivered many, many new buses over the last several years. And also we took a hard look in the last 5 or 6 years in terms of the way we maintenance. Our maintenance regimen is more preemptive and more proactive. So, this one blip that we had, we were able to bounce back rather quickly and continue to move forward. Also, in advance of the bus strategy or the bus action plan, we've been working very hard on several fronts, particularly with the Staten Island Express redesign. This has been a very engaged process where we've communicated with stakeholders such as our customers, elected officials, and other stakeholders to look at how we provide services in Staten Island. I'm also happy to say that since it was such an engaging process, we've hosted 2 of a planned 3 open house sessions where customers and bus operators and stakeholders, along with elected officials, are able to give feedback and provide suggestions in terms of the overall framework that was designed to improve that service. So it's been very, very positive, well attended, and in fact, one of those last week was attended by Borough President Jimmy Otto, so we're very happy about that. Moving right along, under the guise of becoming more transparent, and also you can't really manage what you don't measure. So today, Peter and I will deliver and launch and display a new bus dashboard. We've heard from this board, we've heard from the advocates, and it's now time to deliver on that. The guiding principles was to identify metrics or measures that are more customer centric, things that we believe that are more important to our customers. Again, I'll caution that this is a very iterative process, and we welcome feedback, and we look to make adjustments as we go forward. So just to keep that going, I'm going to ask Peter to take that part of the program right now.
Thank you, Daryl. Can we get the bus dashboard up? So I'm excited to show you our bus performance dashboard, and I think it was exciting to have a public speaker today make some suggestions about the rail indicators, and I think that probably also applies to what I'll show you here. So we're certainly going to take that back. But I'm really excited to roll this one out, and it's now live on MTA.info. Some of the new measures that we're going to show you today will begin appearing in the committee summaries starting next month in April. The dashboard and the new measures really, again, try to focus on what is most important to our customers, their personal trip reliability, and the customer experience on the vehicle. These are industry-leading measures, and unlike the rail measures, they're very similar to the rail measures, but those rail measures we modeled particularly after London and Washington, D.C., which are some of the industry leaders. Neither of them have applied these to buses. This is, in many cases, the first time these will ever be applied to bus systems, to a bus system. And as Daryl mentioned, we're really looking for this to inform our bus plan and where to target improvements, and then to track how well we've been doing in that. When you open the dashboard up, you'll see that the metrics are listed on the top, and filters are on the side that show you can zoom in. At the moment, you can zoom into boroughs or service types, such as local limited, select bus service. As we move forward, we will add enhancements to this. The first metric shown is service delivered, which really is how effective are we in the weekday peak periods at getting the capacity where it's needed, when it's needed. It's similar to the subway measure, really measuring the percent of trips scheduled that are operated in the peak periods at the peak load points on the route. Currently, it's pretty consistently in the high 90s, which is a good where we'd like it. If you look back to 2015, though, you see that we've actually made some significant improvements. And looking further, you click on Manhattan, please. We believe that many of those improvements, much of that improvement was in Manhattan, which was in the low 90s back in 2015 and has increased up into about 97%. Really leveraging a technology investment, which is bus time, combined with significant staff development that Daryl and his team have been working on, to give dispatchers real-time tools and teach them how to use those tools to proactively manage the service and make adjustments to get the buses into the areas of the route that they're needed. A second measure that we're showing, and this is a new measure, is average bus speed. We've talked a lot about bus speeds declining throughout the city and worked very closely with New York City DOT on identifying areas that we can make improvements. It's been declining in general. If you look at Brooklyn, that's down now on local, on the local and limiteds in Brooklyn. You see that it's now less than 7 miles an hour. That's a decline over the last 3 or 4 years. And we believe a lot of this is due to significant private sector construction in downtown Brooklyn, which is really making it challenging for our buses. A lot of bus routes come into downtown Brooklyn and hub there, so that's affecting the entire length of the route. The next measure that I'd like to show you is the first of our customer-focused measures. This is additional bus stop time. It's using, again, information from MetroCard trips of actual customers and vehicle location data from actual buses to measure service evenness and travel time. I'd just like to clarify a comment Commissioner Merdler made. We do, in fact, match individual trips up to the route paths that they require. So on the subway example, at Bowling Green, if we know you're going to Dyer Avenue and 5 number 4 trains come in, we're still going to have you as waiting for that number 5. Same on the bus side. We are looking at which bus path, when you have multiple choices, you need, and measuring the wait time based on that. The next measure is bus speed. If you go to travel time, the travel time tab, thank you. So this is once you're on the bus, how much extra time compared to schedule the average trip makes. For select bus service, you can see if you click on the select bus service tab, it's about 20 seconds improved from the average of all services. So we believe that reflects the investments that DOT and MTA made in improvements like bus lanes and bus lane enforcement. As I said, both of these measures are similar to what Transport for London and WMATA uses on the rail side in Washington, but the first use on buses. A new indicator that combines these, so we've had a lot of questions about how do these two things work together. So what we call a customer journey time performance. Basically, it adds the additional travel time and the additional bus stop time together and looks for each trip. Did you get to where you intended to go within 5 minutes of when you should have gotten there based on our schedule? This is a measure that was developed by Washington, D.C. for their metro system, but this is the first application in the world on buses. We do intend to roll this out on the subways in the coming months. Currently, we're at the low 60s to mid 70s. In this, as you can see, it's higher in August, and we're still processing the months prior to August, but it's higher in August when traffic is less. It's lower in the fall when we have a lot of gridlock alert days, but it's certainly going to identify where the most pressing needs are in the system that we need to focus with a bus plan. We do have some additional measures that you're used to seeing on the dashboard: mean distance between failures, and as Darrell pointed out, particularly in Staten Island, we've made significant improvements in the last years with a newer fleet. A passenger environment survey. For the first time, we'll do what we've been doing on the subways and report monthly passenger environment survey results rolled up for a 12-month period, and it's broken into 3 key performance indicators: appearance, information, and equipment. And lastly, we will still report weight assessment, which is a key management tool that we'll continue to use. We look forward to getting feedback from you and from our customers, and we anticipate making continued improvements. As I mentioned, the dashboard is at busdashboard.mta.info or reachable from the homepage. Thank you.
First, Mr. Albert, and then Mr. Merdler, and then Mr. Weisbrot.
For the dashboard, I think it'll help you understand what riders are experiencing. I do have a question about the additional travel time tab. As Peter mentioned, it's related to the schedule. Depending on time of day, do bus routes that you know have congestion at a certain time of day and less at a different time of day have a different scheduled running time depending on those times of day?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So
I would say almost every route has longer running time in the peak hours than it does in the overnight, let's say.
Every route. Yeah. Every route. Okay. Have the schedules on routes that you know are very congested adapted over time to allow for that congestion and thus are more forgiving, for instance?
We continue to adjust running times. We've gotten much better information in the last 4 years or so with bus time, where we measure every trip over the full month or 2 that we look at. It has continued. We've continued to add running time as we have presented schedule adjustments to you. Those do cost dollars and vehicles to maintain the same level of service.
May I just add to that, though? And this comment applies to subway as well. I'm not going to allow padding of schedules to mask the root cause of why buses or subways are delayed, right? That's a slippery slope to me. It is important that we have schedules that match reality, but what we should also be doing, and Peter, I know, agrees with this, so it's not, the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You should also be relentlessly looking into, okay, so what is it then that's impeding that bus, as we're talking about buses, what is it that's impeding that bus from sticking to schedule rather than just giving up and saying, oh, well, never mind, we'll add some time to it. So I think the schedules should be reviewed, but absolutely we should be honing in on what are the root causes of delay and trying to eliminate them, and that's the purpose of the route-by-route review that, to which I referred earlier. Yes. So don't worry that we're just going to add time. If it's justified, yes, but if it's not, and it's just a reaction to what's really the root cause, then we're not going to do that.
Thank you. Then Mr. Weisbrot.
Let me see if I understand what you said. There is a bus stop in the Bronx at which 3 buses go, BX7 or whatever numbers you want to choose. And there are 8 people standing at the bus stop. And they get on the bus that they want. All right? First, are you able to tell me how long that trip from that person to the end point is?
So what we do is we develop a travel table based on those trips over repeated days, and that builds a sense that those 8 people, some of them are looking for the BX7, some are looking for the BX20. On any given day, we don't know where people are going, but we're looking at overall travel patterns and applying them to actual trips on a given day.
But your main focus in that is on the bus itself and how long it takes to go from point A to point B. Is that not correct?
Once the additional travel time, that is, in fact, once you're on the bus, we're looking at how each of those passengers got to the point that they're getting off the bus.
Well, how do you know that A got on the BX7 in that point and got off at the furthest point?
So we can get into detail offline, perhaps, but we're basically using MetroCard information and looking where successive uses of the MetroCard are. And I can explain it to you.
You don't punch them out when they get off the bus?
That is correct. Similar to leaving the subway, we don't have a tap-in, tap-out.
That was the second point I was going to make. I'm prepared not to take the time of the board to go over this now, but I do suggest strongly that we have an offline session to understand this, because to my mind, this is a flawed concept.
I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you so much for this, both Darrell and Peter. I think this is a real, and Andy, this is a real, I know it's still a work in progress, but I think a really very significant forward step, so I really appreciate it. I have 2 questions. One, related to Commissioner Trottenberg's plea for cameras. We can put cameras, and I think we do, to some extent, on buses themselves to deal with issues that Commissioner Trottenberg raised, and we have the power to do that.
It's somewhat constrained. We certainly have the physical power to put them on buses, and many of our buses, a good large portion of our buses have cameras that are inwardly facing, not outwardly facing. We're working with DOT right now, as we speak, to advance something that we did, I think, as far back as 2011, we're putting forward-facing cameras in front of the bus as she mentioned, as a way to enforce bus lanes. So that's, without going too far, that is certainly an element of the program going forward. Absolutely.
Good. I mean, and it seems to me that would have potentially the same enforcement effect as cameras outside the buses. Is that?
Yes, I think it certainly is very effective. However, with cameras, while they're very effective, is somewhat of a retroactive, it could serve as a deterrent, but in many cases it's very retroactive. We're still going to really advocate for enforcement of the lanes, particularly during the rush hours.
No, I appreciate that, but I do think, as I think we've probably seen on the bridges, if we use the cameras to cite violators, ultimately people will get the message.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Certainly in the early stages, this has to be coordinated with the police as well. But in the longer run, and maybe not in such a long run, once people get the message that you're going to have to pay a fine for being in a bus lane, they won't be in a bus lane. So the sooner that we could implement that, the better off I think we'll be, and we'll resolve the issue that Commissioner Trottenberg raised. And one other question, just to be clear, in terms of wait time and the like, and in terms of schedule, do we have enough buses? Is there a constraint in terms of the number of buses and the number of maybe drivers, but particularly the number of buses, so that, or is that really not an issue at all? And is it just essentially keeping to the schedule and dealing with enforcement issues?
So I'll answer it like this. So as we pour more resources into the current network as it stands, the routing structure, the impediments on the road certainly calls for more and more resources. So when we look at it from that perspective, we will always be somewhat pressured around the size of our fleet. Part of the plan going forward is to really look at the entire network, rationalize it where it makes sense, put adds, takes, and get to the right size of the network and see where we stand. But under the current scenario, in terms of one, the way the network is designed, two, the current impediments of getting across the road puts a lot of pressure on our fleet size.
So is it fair to say just that when we're replacing buses, the issue is the modernization of the fleet and also obviously the environmental consequences of that, positive environmental consequences of that, as opposed to adding buses to the number of buses to the fleet? Or do we have a goal at the moment of adding additional buses to the fleet to make the fleet larger?
So our capital program is based on bus replacement that's predicated on the useful life of a vehicle. And certainly in many instances, we extend the life of many of our vehicles where appropriate. We also want to be customer-centric as we move forward, so technology is embedded in that also. In terms of our performance as being a good neighbor from an environmental standpoint is also embedded in those decisions. But it is predicated on the size of the fleet, one, on replacement and keeping the fleet at a state of good repair. And also what's built into that is a level of growth that's somewhat speculative. And now we are in a position now where we see where new services are being advocated for, that we may have to advance that and grow that number a little bit bigger.
So just to be clear, so our capital program currently anticipates a not only replacement but a certain amount of growth based on population and the like?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So I wanted to follow up just on the camera question, just so I'm clear. Is if the cameras are on the buses and we're using it for enforcement, if there are violators, do we have the legislative rights to then fine them and collect those fines?
So the whole process is limited by legislation, so some advancement needs to happen also. I was actually referring to something that we did as a pilot back in 2011, which had levels of success. At that point in time, it was very onerous on our part because we did all of the back office. The discussions today with DOT is in a different space. Commissioner Trottenberg's team is really looking at ways that how we can advance that where they can help us more. So there's a lot of work to be done, and certainly we are of a mind to do that. Yes, so there's legislation that's constraining it that has to be dealt with. Right. The physical asset has to be dealt with, and some coordination with the two agencies on how we get that done has to be worked through.
Right, so just to be clear, in the fixed New York City plan that the governor had put together, it actually calls for cameras either on buses or in crossings. So hopefully, in any global legislation, that would be included.
Yeah, I think everyone's supportive of it.
I'm sorry. Before you begin, Mr. Merdler, then Mr. Weisbrot.
Quick question, if I may. Are taxis and the Ubers of this world allowed to drive in the bus lanes?
No, absolutely not.
Well, they do.
Well, you said allowed.
I'm sorry. Are you finished?
No, you go ahead. Right, no,
I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Reckler's question, just to be very, very clear in this. So currently, even if we put cameras on the buses, which we have the right to do, the ability to use whatever those cameras reveal to fine violators, we still need legislation to do that, or we can do that now?
1 second. I just want to get it clear.
But let me just comment while those guys are just talking. Right. The plan that we're going to present to you will contain effectively a shopping list for everything that we think needs to be done to modernize and transform the bus network. So that will include any purchases that we think are required where there's justification for expanding service, but also would include any legislative assistance that we need that we may not be able to effect, but you could. It'll all be set out in this plan. Here's what needs to be done, here's what it will cost, and here's where we need some help.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're ready for the paratransit report now. Mr. Irick, please continue.
Yep, very short. The full report can be found on page 70, but in a very, very good way. We've been extremely busy at paratransit, working with our customers and our stakeholders, and also with the MTA task force on paratransit. We continue to work to make the system more flexible, more reliable, and transparent. In this very room this month, Chairman Loader, along with President Foy and Managing Director Hakeem, hosted the My AAR app forum, where we invited customers and advocates to they gave them an opportunity to hear their ideas and feedback to improve not only the new application that's coming, but also the service. We've also looked at our application process, and we're happy to announce that we've streamlined that process and reduced the questionnaire by 50%. I would also say that there's good news. Although there's a lot of work to be done, we have been making headway, and it was reflected in the customer satisfaction survey on the AAR website. And we thank you for that's the completion of my report. Thank you.
Any questions or comments on that part of it? Hearing none, I think we're ready to go to the safety report. And another new face to this table, Mr. Heyman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The safety report begins on page 73. As noted in our report, employee lost time accidents continue to decrease, and to help to maintain the trend, one of the areas of focus that we're focusing on is pre-job safety briefings. These talks are directed at drawing attention to specific hazards that may be encountered while performing work that day. To help in this effort, audits are being performed by system safety staff to ensure that the briefings are being conducted properly. Additionally, New York City Transit is producing an instructional video to help supervisors guide them in this process. Also reflected in our report, subway fires, the majority of which occurred along the right-of-way, have declined over the past 12-month period. New York City Transit continues to combat these types of fires through programs previously mentioned to you in past meetings, such as comprehensive cleaning of stations and interlockings initiated under the subway's action plan. Bus collisions and collision injuries continue to decrease, and bus operations is committed to furthering this trend. Finally, I'd like to draw your attention to our aggressive actions on installing friction pads noted on under our leading indicators. This preventative measure is directed at helping to reduce defects such as broken rails. Based on our performance, New York City Transit is looking at increasing our goal in this area, and that will be reflected in the April report. And that concludes the safety report.
Are there any questions on that, Mr. Merdler?
Turning to page 74, it appears that subway customer accidents have indeed increased rather than decreased. And my question really is one, is it possible to break down what the causes of those accidents is, or what kind of accidents they are? Are they slip and falls? Are they defective rails? Whatever they are? And if so, could we have such information?
Yes, a large portion of those injuries are slip, trip, falls accidents. We have them broken down as far as the locations. Most of them are stairways and platforms, and I'm sure that we can provide that information to you.
And is that the same factor with respect to the bus customer accidents?
I would have to look into that and get back to you as well.
If you have any data on that, could you let us have it?
Of course.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else on the safety report, thank you, and I'll ask Chief Coogan to present the crime report.
Okay, good morning. I'm pleased to report a continued year-to-date decline in subway crime, with total major felonies down 6%. There were 23 fewer total major felonies than during the same period last year. There were 15 additional robberies, with 76 versus the 61 that occurred during the same period last year. Grand larcenies were down 10.8%, with 29 fewer incidents, and felony assaults were down 13.3%, with 8 fewer incidents. During February, 46% of the total major felonies were committed in Manhattan, 26% in Brooklyn, 15% in the Bronx, and 13% in Queens. The substantial decline in grand larcenies year-to-date is mostly attributed to several recent arrests. As we have mentioned in the past, fluctuations in grand larcenies are often tied to the recent arrests of some of our persistent offenders and our ability to keep them out of the subway system, if only for a short while. For example, on February 26th, our Special Operations Lieutenant from Transit District 1, Louis Almonte, nabbed one of our most persistent grand larceny recidivists as he removed a cell phone from a passenger's backpack on the one train during the evening rush hour. 52-year-old Derek Martin was arrested at the 79th Street station and charged with grand larceny. He has 40 prior arrests, including 2 for robbery and 18 for grand larceny. 13 of his arrests were for crimes within the subway system, and his arrest is among the several that have played a role in reducing thefts within our transit system. I also want to note an outstanding arrest that occurred on March 5th at the Freeman Street station in the Bronx. As our officers were patrolling the station, they noticed 35-year-old Randy Hayes asking passengers to swipe him into the subway. Growing nervous, Hayes entered without paying the fare. As our officers attempted to stop him, he violently resisted, spilling $100 bills from a bag he was carrying. It turns out Hayes had just robbed a Metro PCS store nearby by simulating a firearm and was attempting to flee on a train when our officers encountered him. Hayes is a designated transit recidivist and had an open warrant. However, an investigation quickly revealed that his history was even worse, and he had not only violently resisted arrest and assaulted officers previously, but was arrested, convicted, and paroled after a series of robberies in 2007. After this recent arrest, investigators with our Bronx Transit Robbery Squad partnered with our ATF NYPD Strategic Pattern Armed Robbery and Technical Apprehensions Task Force, known as SPARTA, very long name I know, found out that the Metro PCS robbery was the most recent in a series of similar commercial robberies that Hayes was being sought for. Thankfully, Hayes is now in federal custody and is being prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. I use this example not only to highlight how hard our officers work to address lower-level crimes in our subways, but also to show how productive our various investigative and other partnerships can be. With that, I thank you, and I welcome any questions or suggestions that you may have. And the one thing to add, which was a big topic with the bus lanes, I will pass that on to our Patrol Services Bureau and our Transportation Bureau, which are primarily responsible for enforcement in that area. Thank you.
Chief, are there any questions or comments? Because I would think that after the tale you just told of the arrest at Freeman Street,
yes.
One that I know well, that you could hardly contain your comment on this.
He could have used a $100 bill to pay the fare.
Oh, that too. Yes. So poverty wasn't an excuse here. Okay, then. Mr. Weisbrod, you can't resist apparently. Then we're ready to go to the New York City Transit and Finance Report. Ms. Patel.
Preliminary January 2018 farebox revenue was $19.9 million, or 5.4% below budget. On the operating expense side, they were over budget by $16.1 million, or 2.3%, and that was mostly due to the weather. Ridership was $16.2 million, or 8.2% below budget. That concludes my report.
Questions on that? Thank you. Back to Mr. Irick for the bus finance report.
Thank you. MTA bus fare box revenue was $15.3 million, was $2.7 million below the budget. The MTA bus operating expenses were 4.9% below the budget. Preliminary ridership, bus company ridership of $9.4 million was $1.1 million below the budget due to partially the adverse weather for January. Thank you. That completes your report.
Any questions on that? If there are none, I'll ask Mr. O'Grady to present the capital program report.
Good afternoon. A couple of highlights of the capital program report. We awarded projects totaling $145 million in January of 2018. One of note is the Hamels Y flood protection project on the Rockaways for $22 million. We also successfully put in service on January 18th the Lefferts Boulevard elevators out at Lefferts Boulevard. That concludes the capital program report.
Okay. Any questions on that? Mr. Albert.
Is the Hamels Y project completed now? Is Hamels Y finished?
No, we just awarded that project.
Just so do you have an idea yet what kind of GOs are necessary for that?
We have a GO plan underway.
Will that affect both Far Rockaway and Rockaway Park service, or just one?
Peter, you prefer to take it?
Yeah, it will be an impact in service 24/7 during this work that will involve, in some cases, service all to Far Rockaway, in some cases service all to Rockaway Park with the shuttle going along. We've briefed the community, and we can certainly talk to you in detail offline.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Grady. Now I'll ask Mr. Lieber to present MTACC project report.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we have the several projects for which transit is the client being reported at CPOC this afternoon. So given the exemplary pace of this committee meeting, I will limit myself to saying only about Cortlandt Street. Schedule and budget remain intact. That's for completion by December, and we hope an opening in October. There is the one issue that we are encountering is with respect to the Port Authority's work at the north end of the Cortlandt Street station. We are meeting very intensely with the Port Authority. We are meeting intensely with the Port Authority to address that. They are, as Mr. Reckler is well aware, struggling to fit the Performing Arts Center in and to finish that work, and it is having an impact on our work, which is in the same area. The other item I would mention is that Mr. Byford and I have agreed to form a turnover committee that will address not all of the processes associated with the turnover and opening of a new station. It's an area in which I think we all agree we did not set any records for performance in 2nd Avenue, and where we really are committed to doing much better. And so we've set up a process to address that starting now. That's it.
Mr. Lieber? If there are none, thank you. I'll ask Mr. Plachaki to present the procurements.
Good afternoon. The procurement package this month presents New York City Transit and MTA procurements and includes 5 actions totaling $22 million in expenditures. I'd like to briefly highlight 3 procurement actions included in this month's agenda. The first action is an $8.7 million modification to the contract we have with Siemens Industry Incorporated for communication-based train control on the Queens Boulevard line. This modification will enable New York City Transit to utilize ATS software rights that New York City Transit acquired under the base contract for CBTC, and will allow us to roll out ATS for the A, B, C, D, G, J, S, W, and Z lines in a considerably accelerated delivery schedule. As I think everyone knows, the ATS system automatically provides train location dispatchers at the Rail Control Center and field dispatcher offices with information, and dynamically updates the locations of the trains in real time as they move throughout the B division. We believe that this is a significant opportunity for dispatchers to react more effectively and quickly to service disruptions once we get this in place. The next 2 actions are retroactive modifications to New York City Transit's Enhanced Station Initiative Program on packages 1 and 2. The first action is a $4 million retroactive modification to Sitnalta Forte joint venture for the implementation of dynamic wayfinding at street entrances, fare control areas, and platforms at the 3 stations in Brooklyn on ESI Package 1. The introduction of the dynamic wayfinding will improve the customer experience by enabling communication of rotating content in real time and allow for our customers to be able to engage in real trip planning. The dynamic wayfinding was originally envisioned to be incorporated into the contract. However, we didn't have the requirements in place in time for award, so we contemplated it coming through as a change order, and we're just effectively executing it now. The final action is a $4,650,000 retroactive modification to Skanska USA Northeast for the design and installation of precast concrete platform panels at 39th Avenue and Broadway on the Astoria line under ESI Package 2. The original contract contemplated repair of these panels, but as it turned out, when the design build team conducted their field inspections, they realized that quite a number of the panels, 112 to be exact, at these 2 locations of about 412 panels, was so significantly deteriorated that they needed to be replaced. That represents about 27% of the overall panels. We turned the contractor on in order to deal with the lead time, the fabrication of these precast panels, and effectively did not impact any of the closures. I request your approval of all the items in the agenda.
I have a motion to approve. Second. Is there any question or comment, Mr. Merdler?
Mr. Plachaki, as you know, I am loath to disagree with you, because you're usually right. But I have 2 issues.
You got that on record, right?
You can write that down. My issues are with respect to Siemens and AECOM. And in both instances, I am asking for the appointment of a monitor. Whether that monitor be external or internal, I really at the moment don't care. My issue is when people commit crimes ranging from bribery to worse, we have a public responsibility as fiduciaries to make sure that there is no reoccurrence, whether they have a robust internal system or none at all. In the case of Siemens, they have had one prosecution after another for the past 7 or 8 years. Now, many of them relate to sins that occurred in 2014 and 2011, still within the responsibility guidelines. 2013, 2 years, District Attorney's Office, New York County. 2015, Siemens Medical. $5.9 million violation of the Federal Corrupt Practices Act. February 9, 2016, a Siemens official pleads guilty to larceny, and it goes on and on. In fact, back then, either Siemens or the SEC said it was part of the cost of doing business. I recognize we need them to do this job, and I will vote for this procurement. But I say to you that if you do not have a monitor here to look into this, you're asking for a recurrence, and I, for one, think that that is wrong in my fiduciary role. Let me go to AECOM, which in some respects is even worse. AECOM paid $125 million on a nuclear site for misconduct, 2016. A subsidiary of AECOM overbilling. And just to cap it all off, in 2017, the World Bank debarred AECOM for 18 months because of its misconduct. And it goes on and on and on. These folks need a monitor, because if we don't give them a monitor, I tell you, it's our responsibility, and we are encouraging misconduct, which I will not tolerate. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Merdler.
Whoa. Mr. Pachaki.
Okay, I'll try and attempt to keep this short. We've had quite a number of conversations over the need for monitors, and I think that you've made the theme, if not the point, clear at several committee meetings. We are part of a procurement task force that reviews and is going to set some new policy and procedures. I would suggest strongly that this topic be placed on the agenda there so that we can come up with means and ways of installing, whether you call it a monitor, oversight, IPSIG, whatever the parlance we ultimately arrive on, we can make sure that it's applied consistently across the MTA. I do agree in large part with what you said, that, and certainly we are no strangers to the implementation, installation of monitors here at MTA. As I've mentioned in the past, we currently have 7 active monitors monitoring 17 contractors and 146 contracts. It's quite a bit. On all of our Sandy projects, the MTA OIG and the MTA Audit act as monitors for all of our Sandy programs. That's some 42 contractors and 52 contracts. So again, we are certainly not strangers to the need of having monitors in place. I think the challenge that we have is making sure that we come up with a consistent way of implementing them so that we've got that across the board. But we will certainly take that under advisement and follow up.
If I may, just one thing. I have no question you have monitors in place for various people over the years. But here you have 2 examples of enterprises that have become addicted to getting away with it. And I respectfully suggest, at the very minimum, that the chief ethics officer of this place, who serves as a monitor from time to time, or Mr. Norman in your group, be appointed as a monitor for these 2 contracts. Stephen, I tell you this, unless people see that we care, unless people see that in the city of New York they have a Vendex program that makes sure that people understand the city of New York cares. Unless we do that, we encourage more.
Understood.
Mr. Ward.
What I'm having trouble understanding is, why do we continue to allow people to bid that continually have these kinds of problems? Is there simply a shortage of people that are available?
The answer to that question is New York City Transit and MTA as a whole for many, many, many years, certainly the 30 that I've been here, and quite frankly probably before that, have looked at this as a rehabilitative organization. We don't take it lightly. We don't let these companies get away with this information. We impose monitors, and we make sure that when they need the building of a good ethics and compliance program, we install monitors. If you want to look at Siemens in particular, they've had quite a number of monitors over the years, and as well as several independent reviews, and I can provide those to you as a result of probably one of their largest violations, which was the issue that occurred with regard to the bribery in the Argentinian area. Had to do with a large contract. I think it was $1 billion contract. They ended up paying close to $1 billion in fines. We review those documents and we review those programs to determine whether or not that deters future wrongdoing. But the extent to which we have precluded other contractors from doing business in the past and to bar them, we've also done that. So again, the issue on this particular case, Siemens is a going concern. They continue to do business with the United States, with the military and other governments, and we believe that they've put a robust plan in place. That doesn't mean, by the way, that we can't reinforce that. We are always in contact with the folks that monitor this for the United States. As a matter of fact, this breaking information with regard to the latest information that came available about Siemens, they actually contacted us, and that's part of the agreement we have in place with Siemens. When information breaks, the latest information, just so you're clear, had to do with a extradition of one of these 7 executives that were involved in this bribery concept or problem that occurred in 2008. And that's the one that just recently hit.
So we consider ourselves a rehabilitative organization?
The extent to which that's sort of the theme that we've adopted, the extent to which we believe that that's capable and that companies have, I'll say, taken appropriate action in place in order to rid their organizations of those executives and all that were problematic. But when we find out that that's not the case, we either A, will bypass them, find them non-responsible as we've had in the past, or, again, if they put a program in place with the monitor, then we continue to do business. And we give them a short period of time to clean up their act.
So I just want to, forgive me for taking so much time, but a rehabilitative organization. So we have companies that have repeatedly violated the law. Their violation of the law violates all kinds of public trusts, and maybe it creates an environment where work is done improperly, perhaps without a safe outcome, God knows what else. If there are other companies out there that have the ability to do that work, why on earth do we want to continue to go back to the well and deal with people who have repeatedly shown themselves not to rehabilitate their behavior? Why are we a rehabilitative agency? I am all for giving somebody a second chance, but I think there has to be a cure period. There has to be a period of time. Let me give you an example. I run a union. If a union officer gets convicted of a crime, they can't work at a union for 12 years. Period, end of story. That's 12 years after they get out of prison. That's their rehabilitative period of time. We have mandatory sentencing for all kinds of criminal activity. We have jails filled with people who have committed crimes that are way less serious than this and have way less potential to have impact on a large group of the population that, as an example, the riding public if something were to go wrong. And it seems to me that this is a simple place where we can say, the standard we're going to apply is the highest standard. Why would we apply any standard other than the highest standard when it comes to matters like this?
I think I should answer this now. Given the, one of my jobs is to listen to the advice of my staff, but also to gauge the prevailing views and mood of the board, and also to be mindful of the bigger picture. And I'm looking at these bids or these jobs that for which we're seeking your votes, and the one which involves Siemens is particularly important because finally we'll give Frank the ability for his people in the RCC to be able to actually see the trains in the B division. So I'm happy to say, and I appreciate Steve's advice, but we will put monitors on both of these jobs. We will insist that a monitor be appointed by Siemens and by AECOM at their expense.
I got to jump in because the AECOM one, I think, is, if I'm not mistaken, Steve, is a capital construction procurement. Okay, so I need to talk to Commissioner Merdler about this. This is we're at the very end of the job, with ACOM as one of 5 components of. Hold on. And I just want us to all agree on whether it is useful to install a monitor in the construction phase services at the very end of a job when ACOM is one of 5 separate joint ventures for the design, which represents 4% of the project. So I've agreed again and again to the suggestion of monitors. In fact, we initiated it. In this case, it may or may not be effective and efficient. I'd like to discuss it with you.
Where you and I seem to disagree is I want to send a message. The message that the City of New York sends out every single day, which is we have zero tolerance for bribery, corruption of any kind.
Folks, I think we just got an assurance rather than have a continued back and forth from the president of New York City Transit that he would seek to resolve this issue. So let's give him an opportunity to do that. We have a motion on the floor. If there's no other comment, let's call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? Procurements carry. Thank you. And now, President Byford, are there any special reports?
Mr. Chairman, there's 2 in the standard follow-up reports. They're both in the pack. I don't propose to particularly go through them. I'll be happy to take your questions. And they are the MetroCard report and the regular transit recidivism report, in this case representing the report for 4th quarter of 2017. One thing, Naomi, could we please add into the agenda a 3rd item on standard follow-up reports? I think it's best placed there as an item subset C, which would be President's report back on outstanding board business, which, Mr. Chairman, if you just bear with me, I'll just do now briefly. This is a summary of things that you previously asked for. It's good practice that we should keep you appraised of where we are with these items, and certainly in front of the public watching. So some of these I've already talked about, so I can confirm that we will be bringing a presentation in April on the 2018 bus plan. And that will be a high-level document that will also cross-reference to other documents, so things like the City Controller's report, various other reports that have been produced, the Fix New York report. These things, we're not operating in isolation here. We'll cross-reference, but there will also be new content as well. I'm continuing to review our process for categorizing right-of-way delays. You'll see in the book that the somewhat controversial old page is still in there with the big chunk of overcrowding, lack of capacity. So I've left it in there for now, but it is still under review. I haven't forgotten about that. And we are going to provide that breakdown in the next few months once we've done the number crunching. We still owe the committee follow-up info and recommendations on several issues reporting to Transit Adjudication Bureau violations, TAB violations. The memo has been prepared and will be shortly distributed to board members for discussion. There was some discussion previously at the last board meeting about the cost to bring the subway system to a state of good repair and the cost to make all station repairs. That does exist, that data, within the 20-year needs assessment document, but it will also be part of our corporate plan, to which I've referred several times this afternoon, because the plan will talk about what's needed, as I mentioned earlier, to bring both the subway and the buses and paratrans services up to date, and to create a transit system worthy of this great city. There was questions last month about how we would pay for all the needed work, and this is being discussed at the state level between the state and the city, so particularly with regard to the subway action plan. And then, per your request, the next diversity report will include information about senior administrative employees. Okay, so I think we've done a cross-reference to make sure we haven't missed anything. Next month I'll update you on those items and the new ones that came up today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Byford. If there are no further questions or comments, you do.
Motion.
I have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you.